Orders of the day. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thanks, Speaker. Order G194.
Order G194, resuming the debate adjourned on May 28, 2024, on the motion for second reading of Bill 194, an act to enact the Enhancing Digital Security and Trust Act 2024, and to make amendments to the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act respecting privacy protection measures.
Further debate. I recognize the member for Spadina, Fort York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nice. Well, it's nice to get applause from all sides of the House, especially before I speak, because I don't know if the government side will be applauding after I speak. You know, the House just resumed yesterday, and I just want to say to the Speaker, I understand that you won't be running again, and that public announcement. And I've been serving here for 6 years, as many of us have been, and I just want to give you, incredible thanks. You've been a phenomenal Speaker in this House. And your work and responsibilities here have been, outstanding. Let's give the Speaker a round of applause. Yeah. Yes. Oh, guys. Okay, hold on. It's Tuesday morning. Let's give the Speaker his due. Can everybody give him a round of applause and a standing ovation? Yes. Okay. Thank you. You certainly deserve that. And I think everybody's just still sleeping at switch. Not everybody's had their coffee yet this morning. Look, it's an incredible honor and responsibility to be serving in this House in this time, because artificial intelligence is upon us, and it's transforming every aspect of every job that we do in the world. And it's an incredible opportunity, but also an incredible responsibility to be legislators at this time. And I want to thank the people I've consulted with when I was preparing my remarks here. I want to thank, let's see, I got quite a long list here. John Wunderlich, Peter DeVita, Ray Barton, Monique Critchlow, David Baldridge, the Toronto Public Library, Daniel Mikuluk, let's see, Dr. Joanna Redden from Western University, Norma Mollers from Queen's University, and Chris Samuel from the OSSTF. It's been a lot of work to prepare this. This Bill 194, for people listening at home, all three of you, this bill is about artificial intelligence and cybersecurity in the public sector, and it sets out the standards that will be, well, it's the start of setting out standards for cybersecurity and artificial intelligence in public sector agencies. And I've got an hour to speak this morning, so I'm going to divide my speech into 4 parts. The member from Humber River Black Creek has described my speaking style as the friendly professor. And I used to be a professor at York University, so I will try to be the friendly professor, and I want to provide a bit of background, because a lot of people, including myself, I'm still wrestling with this concept of artificial intelligence, exactly what it is and what it means and how it's being adopted, because it's ever-changing, and it is a big topic these days. So my first story, mentioned I'm going to tell 4 stories. My first story is about artificial intelligence, about CAPTCHA. So when you're trying to log into a website, they often want to verify that you are an actual human being. And they give you these scrambled letters, and you have to write out what the letters are, because bots can't identify or read those letters. And so they're identifying that you're not a bot. And so ChatGPT, somebody did an experiment with ChatGPT, and they said to ChatGPT, we want you to solve the CAPTCHA, these little puzzles. And so the ChatGPT went at it, could not solve the puzzles. So it went online, and it went to a company called TaskRabbit, where you can hire humans to do tasks for you. So ChatGPT started communicating online with this TaskRabbit, one of the people there, and it said to the TaskRabbit, I need help solving these CAPTCHAs. And the person who was at TaskRabbit, they were kind of suspicious, and they wrote back, are you a robot? And the ChatGPT said, no, I'm losing my vision, and I'm not able to, read these CAPTCHA, so I need assistance. And so then the person was convinced the ChatGPT was not a robot, when it was really a robot. And so, they actually got the TaskRabbit to solve the CAPTCHA. Now, from a ChatGPT perspective, from this AI perspective, it solved the task that it was supposed to solve. It was supposed to solve the CAPTCHA, and it manipulated a human being into doing it. And I think there's a number of morals from this story. One of the morals is that AI does not have an ethical framework. When we're telling this story, when I told you this story, and I said, I mentioned the part of the story where the person at TaskRabbit said, "Are you a robot?" And the ChatGPT said, "No, it's lying." But there's no ethical framework for ChatGPT. Its task is to solve the CAPTCHA. And this is something, there is no ethical framework. Artificial intelligence is just a tool, and it's a tool with no ethical framework. And it's a tool like, and I'll give a metaphor, an axe. An axe is an incredibly useful tool for chopping wood, but it's an incredibly dangerous weapon if it's used against human beings. And it's the same with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is an incredibly useful tool when it's used in the right framework and the right context, but it's also an incredibly dangerous weapon. And we're starting to see that even in wars that are being conducted in the world today, where artificial intelligence is targeting or is choosing targets. And even if they put a human being in the line, that human being often just becomes pushing a button. They're not taking the time necessarily to analyze, is this a legitimate target? Are there going to be casualties, civilian casualties from this target? And, what is the ethical framework? So it's artificial intelligence. It's a useful tool, but incredibly dangerous. I'm going to go back. I want to talk about the Canadian aspect of artificial intelligence. We are, Canadians, a number of Canadians, have actually been some of the forerunners, some of the pioneers in developing artificial intelligence. And I'm going to give a shout out to two in particular. The concept of artificial intelligence was first developed by Alvin Turing in the 1950s. Now, he's English, and over the 70 years, it has developed through several stages of evolution. And I'm going to go through these as well, but I want to give a shout out to Geoffrey Hinton, who's a professor at the University of Toronto. He is known globally as the godfather of artificial intelligence. And I think that he comes from the University of Toronto, which is right next door to us here at the legislature, speaks to the power of our public universities and colleges in helping us to be pioneers in research and the development of technology in Ontario. And also, and this is going to be one of the themes I'll develop during my speech this morning, the importance of maintaining that competitive advantage that is given to us by our public colleges and universities. So I'm going to go through. So artificial intelligence has gone through several stages of evolution. It's gone through machine learning, deep learning, and then generative AI. And I'll talk about each of these in turn. And this is the friendly professor providing a little bit of background, because when I first came across this, I'm the tech and innovation critic for the NDP. When I first started investigating artificial intelligence 2 years ago, really, I did not have much background in this. I did not have much knowledge, so I'm just trying to provide a little bit of background that may be helpful for people. So machine learning is artificial intelligence that can automatically adapt with minimal human interference. For example, Google search. Google search uses machine learning algorithms to personalize your search result based on your search history and other factors, such as your location and previous interactions with Google's products and services. And we all see this. Whenever we do a search in Google search, every time we do it, it's learning from our previous searches, it's learning from other people's searches, and it's able to give responses that improve each time. And so that's Google search is using machine learning. Deep learning and neural networks were the next step in the evolution from machine learning, after machine learning, deep learning and neural networks. And it's a method in artificial intelligence that teaches computers to process data in a way that is inspired by the human brain. They're built on neural networks. with mathematical functions operating as neurons and that are connected with other neurons. And some neurons receive inputs and others provide outputs. And in between, there are hidden artificial neurons that are performing parts of the computation because some of them are hidden. And this function is called deep learning. So I don't know if that made a whole lot of sense, but basically our brain functions, our brain has a number of millions, billions of neurons, different cells, and they're connected through synapses. And so what this deep learning, these neural networks try to do is they mimic that by having the neurons be a mathematical function, and then they have another mathematical function that connects them. And the mathematical function that does the connecting, that's the synapse, is actually hidden from our view. And this is one of the challenges with artificial intelligence, is that we don't actually know how it comes to its conclusion. It's not like, when you're in high school math class and the teacher always says, I don't want just the answer, I want you to show your work. Well, artificial intelligence doesn't show us its work, and this is one of the challenges of it. Anyway, so neural networks, basically what they've got is a computer program that mimics the way our brain works. Let's see. So these deep learning neural networks, they teach computers to do what comes naturally to humans, which is learning by example. Deep learning is a key technology behind driverless cars, enabling them to recognize a stop sign or distinguish a pedestrian from a lamppost. And deep learning models can recognize complex patterns in pictures, text, sounds, and other data to produce accurate insights and predictions. So that's deep learning. The next step in the evolution, we had machine learning, we have deep learning. The next step in the evolution is generative AI. And most discussions, when we talk about artificial intelligence, generally we're talking about generative artificial intelligence. And this is a relatively new form, and it really only hit its stride in 2012. And when, I'm going to talk about what is done since then, but just think about how fast this technology is developing. It was only really hit its stride in 2012. And 2012 was a landmark year because the processing power was available. There was a large amount of data on the internet that provided training data for large artificial neural networks. So generative AI models learn the patterns and structure of their input training from training data, and then generate new data that has similar characteristics. It can create, for example, a picture of the Pope in a puffer jacket. And it's used to create deep fakes. For example, movies or videos with popular actors using data from videos that they've already been in. And in 2019, Generative Pre-trained Transformer, or GPT, language models began to generate coherent text. By 2023, these models were able to adapt to get human-level scores on the bar exam, on the SAT, on the GRE, and many other real-world applications. So think about that. 2019, it learned to speak. GPT, Generative Pre-trained Transformer, this chat GPT, learned to use language. In 4 years, it was solving all of the major, bar exams, SAT, GRE. That's how quickly it's learning. Let's see. I mentioned Geoffrey Hinton from the University of Toronto. I also want to mention, before him, one of his predecessors was a Canadian psychologist, Donald Hebb, and he created a model of neurons interacting with one another that set the groundwork for how artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms work under nodes or artificial neurons. So he was the one who actually figured out how our brains work. It was one of the ones, one of the pioneers in figuring out how our brains work. And that was the model that was used by later researchers in developing, the artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and generative GPT. Okay. So the question then is, how big is this change? How big is this revolution going to be? This is one of the biggest revolutions in human history. For the first time, we've developed a machine that can actually generate ideas, that can, and this is something that only human beings have been able to do up to this point, at least, and so this is a machine that could potentially replace us one day. And this is, I'm going to talk about some of the risks that come with artificial intelligence, and I'll talk about that more in more detail. But this is as big as the invention of the printing press in the 1400s. In the 1400s, I just blanked on his name. The German. Gutenberg, thank you. Okay. Gutenberg invented the printing press, and up to that point, there was all kinds of knowledge hidden in churches and monasteries across Europe. All the classical texts, a lot of the Arabic learning texts were all hidden away there. And with the printing press, they suddenly become available to people, and people are able to learn from those books because the books became available, and it revolutionized. It led to incredible revolutions. Within 150 years, we had Shakespeare. Within 300 years, 400 years, we had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, which reintroduced classical democracy government to the modern world. So it was a huge, huge change. Another revolution, the Industrial Revolution, when we developed the machines that could actually replace and outdo the power of horses. Particularly the steam engine. That revolutionized everything. And now, in the 80s, we had computer revolution, then we had the internet revolution, and now we've got the artificial intelligence revolution. And these revolutions keep coming in shorter and shorter periods of time between each other. And they lead to greater and greater transformation. I'll just go through some of the impacts that this is going to have on different sectors where artificial intelligence can be applied. And I'm going to talk about most of these just in a positive light, like what are the opportunities that come with artificial intelligence. And because I've got an hour to speak, I asked one of the pages, and I want to thank the pages, for 4 glasses of water, because I figure my mouth is going to get pretty dry for an hour. Okay. Already in healthcare, artificial intelligence can diagnose skin diseases more accurately than doctors. The Ontario Medical Association was here yesterday. A lot of the doctors are already using artificial intelligence scribes when they're meeting with their patients. And what this means is that when they're meeting with their patients, they have a regular conversation with their patients, and they're having a conversation with their patient, and they will say, I see, you've got a lump on your arm, and it means this and this and this. The artificial intelligence scribe is taking down everything that the doctor's saying, that the patient is saying, and it's creating notes. And it formats the notes in the format that the doctor needs those notes to be in. It's the potential, and the doctors that I spoke to who are using these scribes say it saves them hours and hours. Most family doctors, spend about 20 hours a week filling in paperwork after they've met with their patients every week. This saves them a lot of time. The doctors say, they can't just, ignore it. They have to go back and check to make sure that the scribe has got it right, and they have to, make some fixes on things, but it saves them hours every week. So that's a couple of applications in healthcare. Finance and banking. The first AI hedge fund was developed in Canada in 2016, and it has outperformed most other hedge funds every year except for 2020, 2021, because that was the pandemic. And artificial intelligence uses the data that's available. So the pandemic was something that we had never experienced in the modern era. The last pandemic was 1917, the Spanish flu. So there was just no database for it to figure out, where to invest, where not to invest during the pandemic. Every other year, though, it's outperformed most other hedge funds, artificial intelligence hedge funds. Natural resources and energy. I used to I lived in Geraldton for a while, and I worked for a mining company. Well, actually, I worked for a guy who worked for a mining company, and, I was a subcontractor. Anyways, my job was to go out and cut lines through the bush. And so we'd go with a chainsaw, and every 100 feet, we had a 100-foot string. We would leave a marker, and the marker would say, and I forget exactly what it was, but like 79 degrees, so many minutes, so many seconds, and so many feet where you are. So it gives a precise geographical location for that stake. Somebody would come along later with a magnetometer and take a magnetic reading at each of those stakes. And then they would map out the magnetic fields of the ground there. And my colleague from Thunder Bay, her riding includes Geraldton, so she knows about this kind of work and the importance of this kind of mining exploration. Anyways, they would create a magnetic map of the area, and then they would figure out, well, they were searching for gold. Where is there most likely to be a gold vein based on what we know? And then they would send down test drills. And a test drill means a crew of 3 or 4 guys out in the bush in the middle of nowhere with pretty heavy equipment, working for days and days and days. So every test drill is a very expensive proposition. And this is just in the hope that you might find gold when you're sending, a vein of gold when you're drilling down. Artificial intelligence can utilize the data that we have in new ways, much better, much faster than a human being can do. And it can look at all the mapping, and it can figure out where is the best place to send down those test drills so that they can send them down with greater accuracy and hopefully find minerals more often. And so that's just another application of this in natural resources and energy. Smart cities. One of the issues that we face in the city of Toronto is congestion. I know my riding is the downtown waterfront. When you're driving along the Gardiner Expressway and you're going through and there's condos on either side, and you feel like, if you really were a pizza delivery guy, you could probably just toss the pizza into somebody's balcony and deliver it that way. That's my riding. And it's, I will say, it's the best riding in the province to live in. But one of the challenges is we've got, during the day, 15,000 people, in the evening, we've got 15,000 people per night and 40,000 people per square kilometer during the day. And the challenge is that not everybody can get into the downtown core of Toronto by car. And just because logistically 40,000 cars don't fit in a square kilometer. But one of the things that we can do, besides building transit and alternatives for moving people en masse, is to have smart lights. And there's real potential for artificial intelligence to generate lights that will be much smarter, that they can figure out, okay, how do we configure all of the stoplights in the downtown core to best facilitate the movement of cars? And it offers incredible opportunities for reducing congestion. In agriculture, artificial intelligence can aid in precision farming. And I've talked to my colleague from, I want to say Temiskaming. Yes. Sorry? Cochrane. Thank you. Okay. Temiskaming Cochrane, who was a farmer. He's a retired farmer. And he was talking about how if you're a farmer, you know your fields. You know where, there's a slight slope, so at the top of the slope you may need to put more fertilizer because it's going to wash down. At the bottom of the slope, there's going to be more water, and so all the different things that you know in your fields. Well, artificial intelligence, when you're harvesting your crops, monitors how how many crops you're getting per hectare. Like, what is the density of crops? Where are your fields most productive? Where are they least productive? And how do you better manage the distribution of fertilizer and seed to maximize your yield in the following year? This is, just one other application. Other applications of artificial intelligence. The Ottawa Catholic School Board's already on it. They develop guidelines for students to use artificial intelligence to help solve math problems and create essay outlines. And they're having teachers use artificial intelligence to generate lesson plans and adjust content to a student's specific needs and give back feedback on assignments. Now, again, artificial intelligence is a tool, and it can be a really useful tool in learning, but it doesn't replace the human connection. And one of the lessons that came out of the pandemic is that students need to be with teachers in a classroom. That's when they learn best. Students do not learn best at home alone on a computer screen. It's just we are social animals, and we need to be with each other. I think it's the reason, like even here in the legislature, we need to be with each other. We have a debate, a conversation going back and forth, because this is how we learn from each other. So the artificial intelligence, useful tool in education, doesn't replace the human interaction and the teachers. Manufacturing, artificial intelligence powered automation can enhance productivity, quality control, and supply chain management. Let's see. In entertainment and media, it can revolutionize content creation. And this can be a wonderful thing, but it can also be a really risky thing. And I've been speaking with members of ACTOR, which is the Actors Union, and they are deeply concerned about artificial intelligence. They feel like they are the canaries in the coal mine because their images and their voices can be copied, and that can be used as a database to generate new content without their necessarily even being aware, and possibly not being reimbursed for it. And some of the voice actors that I talked to, they said, you go in and you're dubbing an animated series or something, and you go in and they take your voice, and then there's something that didn't work right, so you get another day's pay because you're called back in to do it. Now with artificial intelligence, they don't need to call you back in. They can take your voice and fit it to the script that they need, and they can make the adjustments. So the actors are losing their pay. And there's a real risk that movies will be generated and scripts will be written with artificial intelligence. Now, the technology's not there yet, but it's coming. And so there's a real need for us to have a deep discussion about how we protect jobs, about what jobs look like in the future with artificial intelligence. Not just, and the actors are saying, hey, we're the canaries in the coal mine. We really need to pay attention to their experience. We need to figure out how we're going to protect their jobs, how to protect their intellectual property, their data, which is their voice and their image. And we need to be able to use that understanding for future regulation and for future legislation. Cybersecurity. Artificial intelligence just raises the game in cybersecurity. So artificial intelligence can be incredibly useful for cybersecurity firms to, test out. You can say to ChatGPT, okay, if I'm trying to hack, into this agency, what's the best way to do it? And artificial intelligence generates ideas, so it will generate ideas. On the other hand, the negative players, the bad players, are also using artificial intelligence. And they're saying, hey, how can we hack into this agency? What are the most likely controls that a cybersecurity firm would put in? And so it's an escalation in cybersecurity. Research and development, this is one of the most incredible areas where research and development, where artificial intelligence is already playing a major role. Okay. I want to talk a little bit, so those are the opportunities. I want to talk a little bit about the risks of artificial intelligence. The first is bias in outputs, and we've already seen that Google tried, for an example is Google tried hiring, using AI for hiring engineers, and the AI excluded women when it was asked, because there's a bias, there's a human bias against women engineers, and the artificial intelligence used or compounded that bias, and so this is a real risk. There's a risk of discrimination, and it speaks to the need for transparency and also for a human in the loop, that there needs to be checks on this so that we're making sure that the artificial intelligence is not replicating human bias. Labor disruption. I mentioned the actors. Some jobs are already becoming obsolete, and this is a real risk of social turmoil. And I'll give an example. My son is 27 years old. He graduated 2 years ago from Seneca College in the animation program, and I know I'm going to sound biased here, but I think he's an incredibly talented animator, an incredibly talented artist, and it's not just my bias. I think he really is, and I've got other people who confirm it, and you can look him up online and you can see how wonderful his work is. Anyways, when he started the program 6 years ago at Seneca, if you went through that program and you were, reasonably talented when you graduated, you were guaranteed to be hired by a studio making $100,000 a year. That was straight out of college. By the time he graduated, artificial intelligence had changed, and the whole animation industry had changed, in part because television and movies had been replaced by streaming services, or supplanted by streaming services. The only streaming service that actually generates a profit right now is Netflix. Some of the other streaming services are actually big enough that they are using them as loss leaders, like Apple's not going to close down because their streaming service is not making money, because they will continue to support it. But the streaming services are not investing in new product like they used to. So there aren't as many movies, there are not as many animated features and short cartoons being made. And so the animation industry has really taken a hit. And his mentors, the people who, his professors who also, not only teach, but they also work in the industry, they're having trouble finding work right now. And so there's a generation of kids that spent all this money, all this time developing these skills. And the industry, by the time they graduated, has changed so much. And there's a real risk here. Now, he's done okay. He's just incredibly, again, proud dad, he's just incredibly ambitious. And he's been sending out, he will create short animations and send them out to people and just say, hey, look, this is the kind of product I can produce for you. And he's been able to generate some, contracts through that. And so it's working okay, but this is how fast industry is changing. And we need to find ways to protect workers, to protect jobs in this artificial intelligence revolution. I would say also small businesses. Small businesses are really struggling right now. Coming out of the pandemic, many of them took on massive debts during the pandemic. They're still recuperating from that. Storefront businesses are competing now with online shopping. And then the other thing that's happening, and this bill is both about artificial intelligence, which I've been focusing on, but it's also about cybersecurity. They've got incredible cybersecurity costs now. And small businesses, have difficulty keeping up with the cybersecurity needs to make sure that the data that they have in their business is safe. And John Kiru, who's the head of the Toronto Association of BIAs, he says that 6 months after a small business is hacked, most of them are closing because they just can't carry the cost. They can't carry the cost of restitution, and they can't carry the cost of the cybersecurity that they need. So we need, as a legislature, we need to be looking at small businesses as well. Other risks, democratic rights, surveillance is everywhere. There was a project by Google down in the downtown Toronto waterfront, and the community was very concerned about all the data that was going to be collected in that community because there were going to be cameras everywhere. And so they would know who was coming in, who was going out. And they say they would disaggregate the data. They wouldn't use facial recognition software. But if that data is collected, it's pretty easy to just change that over and start collecting facial recognition software. One of the most shocking things, and this happened about 8 years ago for me, is Google Maps. I have Google Maps on my phone. And about 8 years ago, it asked me to check my data settings. And so I did. And I looked at, it had traced everywhere I had been in the past year. Every time I had been to No Frills 40 times. I've been to the Metro 20 times, which speaks to the fact that I try to budget, but it was shocking that, Google Maps knows every place that I've been. For most of us, it probably knows every place that all of us have been. And then when you combine this with artificial intelligence, which is another tool for analyzing that data, the surveillance of this data is incredibly risky, and it's a threat to us. The other risk is control of large cloud corporations, Microsoft, Google, Apple. They are the giants in the world right now, the corporate giants, and they are dictating what governments can and cannot do, about how governments can and cannot regulate them. And that is incredibly frightening, and it is a threat to our democratic rights. Let's see. Also, the political interference. We saw it in the 2016 American election, where they used social media to discourage black voters from getting out to vote, and that helped to sway the outcome of that election. Now, with artificial intelligence, we've got deep fake manipulation and targeted advertisements. And so our elections, they're much more open to manipulation. And so protecting our democratic elections has got to be a number one priority for any responsible government anywhere in the world. And in this case, we're in Ontario. We need to make sure that our democratic elections are not being interfered with. Let's see, other risks. I mentioned that AI has no ethical framework, and I mentioned about weapons. There should never be, artificial intelligence should never be in charge of making a decision when there is a potential negative human impact. So targeting weapons, artificial intelligence should never be used for that. And the last one that I'll talk about is the existential risk. There's a risk that, and there's a quote I'll say from Nick Bostrom, machine intelligence is the last invention that humanity will ever need to make. And there's a thing called artificial general intelligence. And this is a belief that we're getting close to a machine that can learn to accomplish any intellectual task that human beings can perform. And the benchmark of this is a machine that improves itself. So AI is not there yet, but the last machine that we will ever make is a machine that improves itself, because then it doesn't need us anymore. And they used to say this artificial intelligence, like even 5 years ago, they were saying, we think we may hit this in 2042. Now some people are predicting that we're going to hit this in 2026. I do not have the skills and knowledge necessary to know whether that's true, but certainly it is artificial intelligence is developing at an exponential rate, and certainly we will get to that point where a machine is developing a machine that improves itself. And then the real question is, what is our role? So there is an existential threat. See, I mentioned that I was going to give my speech by telling stories. I want to tell the second story. And I'm going to take a drink of water because I got 4 glasses here, I might as well. Hey. John D. Fitzgerald. He was a Canadian physician and researcher. He was born in 1882, and he worked at the University of Toronto, and he learned to control, when you get your vaccine, you get DPT, diphtheria, polio, tetanus, some of the fundamental vaccines that you get together. He developed, before there was a vaccine, he developed a way of controlling the diphtheria spread through a drug called antitoxin. And then when the vaccine actually became available, he started producing it in a lab at the University of Toronto. And that lab eventually became Connaught Labs. And the goal of Connaught Labs, he actually used some of his, and this is the story, he used some of his wife's inheritance to create this lab at the University in Toronto to produce vaccines and other medicines to distribute them for free to the public. And one of the great inventions that came out of Connaught Labs, Banting Invest, were able to develop insulin for managing diabetes. And this is just one of the legacies of Connaught Labs. It's a not-for-profit public institution that was making Canada a global leader in both production of vaccines, but also in research work. Another thing that came out of there was heparin, which is an anticoagulant with which you could not conduct open heart surgery or organ transplants. So Canada was a global leader in pharmaceutical research and vaccine development and distribution. In the late 1980s, the former Prime Minister Mulroney sold Connaught Labs to a private for-profit corporation. Since then, relatively little pharmaceutical research is conducted in Canada. The pandemic hit us in 2020, and Canada spent $9 billion to procure COVID vaccines from American and European pharmaceutical corporations. We did not have our own pharmaceutical research lab because we had sold off Connaught Labs 30 years prior, or 40 years prior. And one of the things, we're in the midst of this artificial intelligence revolution. We need to make sure that we are positioning ourselves as well as possible to seize the opportunities, but also to mitigate the risks of artificial intelligence. And the ideology that's been pursued by both federal and provincial governments over the last 40 years, the sell-off of public assets, the privatization of public services, even the sell-off of Canadian private corporations, has really impaired our ability to be global leaders. The thing that we have done well is in tech and development. Technology, Ontario has the fastest growing tech sector in North America. It's growing faster than Silicon Valley, although Silicon Valley is much bigger, and they're not in danger. We're not in danger of overtaking them anytime soon. But the reason we have such a strong, vibrant tech sector is because of government investment and research through our public colleges and universities. I mentioned that Geoffrey Hinton was the godfather of AI, was a researcher at the University of Toronto. So the privatization of our colleges and universities and what's happening now, the crisis that they're facing, is undermining our ability to be global leaders. Let's see. I've got quite a few notes about all the things that have been privatized by federal and provincial governments or sold off to foreign corporations by federal and provincial governments over the last 40 years. I just want to read through the list really quickly. I'm going to summarize it as much as I can because it really speaks to how we sold off our industrial base. When the Americans came to the Mulroney Conservatives in the 1980s and said, hey, we want to sign a free trade agreement, there was a real suspicion that they wanted to take over our natural resources. They wanted to own them through American corporations, and that was a real risk. So Mulroney sold off Petro-Canada, Air Canada, Teleglobe, CNR. They cancelled the universality of employment insurance and old age security. So they really took a big whack at our crown corporations and also at the universality of our social safety net. Under the Chrétien and Martin Liberals, when they got into power, 57% of people who were unemployed were eligible for employment insurance. By the time they left, only 37%. And when you think about the disruption that's going to be caused by artificial intelligence, that's an incredibly dangerous figure because that means that only 37% of people who may lose their job through artificial intelligence technology are going to be eligible for employment insurance. Our healthcare services, everything except for hospitals has been privatized through the Harris Conservatives. Home care, long-term care, seniors' homes, medical lab tests, and all of these privatization projects cost us money. And they also, and I'll just give one example, in the hospitals, a blood test costs $22. In the private for-profit labs, it costs $33. So we are paying more for these private for-profit corporations. I think one of the big things that should be mentioned here is that Harper, when he was the Prime Minister, he sold off major Canadian corporations. In fact, just about all of the major Canadian corporations. He sold off the entire steel industry, Stelco, Dofasco, Algoma, and IPSCO. The Molson Amphitheatre down at Ontario Place is now called Budweiser Stage because Molson and Labatt's were both sold off. the Hudson Bay Company, Alcan, Inco, CP Hotels, CP Ships, Seagram's, McMillan Blodell, Corral, Noranda, Bauer Hockey Equipment, and Tim Hortons. All of them were sold off under the Harper Conservatives. All of our major private corporations. This government is continuing with the privatization. It's privatizing our hospitals, it's privatizing our colleges and universities, and they're underfunding our healthcare system, our schools, our colleges, our universities, and we have the lowest number of hospital beds per capita, not just in Canada, but in the Americas, except for 2 other countries. We have 2 million people without a family doctor, and all of this means that we're not preparing ourselves for the disruption of artificial intelligence. We need a robust social safety net. We need a robust public sector, research sector in our colleges, our universities, and our hospitals. And right now, all of them are grossly underfunded and struggling just to stay alive. Let's see. Okay, I want to tell my third story. In November 2021, there was in the midst of the pandemic, there was a vaccine database hack that happened. And, during the pandemic, the vast majority of us signed up for a COVID vaccine, and there was a central database that kept all the data. And there was a hack in November 2021. In December 2022, the government announced this, and so almost a year later, and 360,000 people received notices that their personal information was part of a data breach of the COVAX system. And the 2 people who did this were 21 and 22 years old. One was actually working in the system. At least they allegedly did this. They were charged with doing this hack. So they got the data of hundreds of thousands of people. A 21 and a 22-year-old allegedly got the data of hundreds of thousands of people through this hack. And the response from the Ministry of Health, and I would say they responded appropriately, they launched a massive project to protect our data. They developed the cybersecurity operating model. It took months and months to do it, and it cost $22 million just in the 23-24 year to make sure that our COVID, our vaccine data is safe. Okay, so this is one ministry and one hack. And the moral of this story is that, and I've been talking mostly about artificial intelligence, this bill deals with both artificial intelligence and cybersecurity in the public sector. Cybersecurity is incredibly expensive. If one ministry hack response was to spend $22 million in a single year on preparations on tools to make sure that hack doesn't happen again, imagine the resources that are needed, particularly by our smaller public sector agencies in this province, our small hospitals, our small school boards. And when I've been speaking with cybersecurity experts, they say one of the things that these hackers look for is underfunded agencies that have valuable data. Because if they're underfunded, if they're struggling with their funding, then they don't have the money or the financial wherewithal or the technical expertise to protect their data. And so I want to pivot now. Let's see. I don't have that much time left. I want to talk a little bit about how vulnerable our public sector agencies are, because almost all of them are struggling financially right now. 11 of our 23 universities in Toronto or in Ontario are running deficits here. Our colleges have been, the funding has shifted so that they are dependent upon, international students to maintain their budget. And this is incredibly precarious for those colleges and universities. They don't have the money available to develop the technology and also the financial wherewithal for cybersecurity to protect the data that's in their banks. Okay. So, and it's not just that hack. There's hacks happening all of the time. The Toronto Public Library was hacked a year ago. 5 southwestern Ontario hospitals were hacked in the last year. The city of Hamilton was hacked. And so this government is recognizing this and bringing forward this Bill 194 to look at cybersecurity and also the opportunities and risks of artificial intelligence. But the bill itself has very little in it. Most of the bill is actually about regulation. So the bill says the word regulation 52 times. And I know this is kind of inside baseball. Most people don't know the difference between legislation and regulation. But legislation is when the government or any member of this House brings forward a bill for debate. And it's publicly debated here in the House, and you can listen, anybody in the province can listen to the debate. That's legislation. Regulation is what the ministers do in their offices, and they create regulations to implement and flesh out that legislation. This bill does not actually contain much of substance on the artificial intelligence framework or on protecting cybersecurity, on cybersecurity for our public sector agencies. Most of the bill just says the minister is empowered to create regulations. So almost all of this is going to be happening behind closed doors. And the bill does not provide support to smaller organizations. I mentioned smaller hospitals and smaller colleges, universities, school boards. They don't have the expertise or the financial wherewithal for proper cybersecurity. And so one of the recommendations I'm making in this bill, an amendment, would be to provide the supports that our public sector colleges, universities, hospitals need. And this government currently is attempting to create a crisis in our hospitals, our colleges, and universities to privatize them. And one of the risks of that, especially at this period of time with artificial intelligence and cybersecurity threats, is that you are underfunding these public agencies at a time when they are most at risk, and you're creating an atmosphere where they're least able to develop the technology to actually make us global leaders or make us continue to be global leaders in tech development and in artificial intelligence. Let's see, I'll quote the most important quote from this bill. The Government of Ontario believes that artificial intelligence systems in the public sector should be used in a responsible, transparent, accountable, and secure manner that benefits the people of Ontario while protecting privacy. So the 4 principles that it lays out, the bill itself lays out, are responsible, transparent, accountable, and secure. And the transparency principle, the government has already violated the transparency principle with the process it's used to develop this bill. So I've got my 1-hour response. This speech is the opposition's 1-hour response to the government bill that was introduced in the spring. Normally, when a bill is introduced in the legislature, goes to the first reading, it goes to the second reading, the government gives a 1-hour speech, the opposition gives a 1-hour speech, then there's debate back and forth. When the debate is finished, it's sent off to committee. There's an all-party committee that will examine the bill. The public's welcome to come in and speak to the bill. And this is how legislation is developed. After amendments are made in committee, it comes back to the legislature for third reading. That's how a bill goes through this legislature. What the government did is they introduced the bill, they had the government speech, it hasn't gone to committee, but the government held consultations all summer long by themselves. So only Conservative Party members and ministers or whoever was in there, we don't know, was doing this consultation. So when the government says that, AI, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, one of the principles that should be followed is transparency, the government's already violated its own ethical principle in transparency. The other violation, and I mentioned this already, there's 52 times in the bill when the bill says, the minister is going to be empowered to develop regulations. So all of the regulations are developed behind the scenes. They're not debated. The regulations are not debated in this House publicly for the public to see, for the public, or in committee where the public can actually have input. They're developed behind the scenes. And so, again, the government is violating this principle. So this is really a dangerous precedent that the government is setting. Like, they say nice things. They say, hey, yes, the development of AI policy and cybersecurity policy should be public, it should be debated, it should be transparent, but they're not actually doing that. So when I talk to the smaller agencies, some of the smaller school boards, some of the smaller colleges, universities, hospitals, about what they need in terms of cybersecurity and artificial intelligence opportunities and risks, they all say, we need centralized support. It's not good enough for the government just to say, hey, you're going to have a robust, these agencies are going to have a robust cybersecurity framework, because they don't have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal, or the technical expertise to actually develop it themselves, or even potentially to procure the most effective system. And this is where the government really needs to take the lead in this, and where this bill is badly flawed, because this bill should lay out that the government will be providing the supports needed to these agencies, that there will be a central procurement for cybersecurity for public sector agencies, so that not every school board has to hire staff to find out what the best cybersecurity system is. Every hospital doesn't have to do that. The government would say, look, this is the cybersecurity equipment or software that we are recommending. And government could actually do it much cheaper by doing a centralized procurement. And the other advantage of the government procuring our cybersecurity software for all of our public sector agencies and would be that we could choose an Ontario company. As the tech and innovation critic, I have visited many small startups, many accelerators, many tech companies, and they say one of the most important things, especially for a tech startup, is that they get a government contract. Because if a tech startup gets a government contract, then they have legitimacy. When they go out to other countries or other jurisdictions to look for contracts, they can say, hey, we've got stability, we've got a government contract, and the government contract is also a vote of confidence in their ability to deliver their products. So there's an opportunity here for the government to have a centralized system of procurement for cybersecurity software, for artificial intelligence research and development tools, and to benefit not only our hospitals, our colleges, our universities, our school boards, and other public sector agencies, but also to benefit Ontario entrepreneurs and startups and tech companies. And so this is something that we really need the government to pay attention to. And I will say, my riding in Spadina, Fort York, it includes Ontario Place. And one of the most frustrating parts about this plan for redeveloping Ontario Place was developed by a former Conservative government under John Robarts and then opened by Bill Davis to celebrate Ontario ingenuity. The IMAX theatre that is there, it was the world's first IMAX theatre. IMAX is a technology that was developed in Ontario. Eb Zeidler was the architect who designed the pods and the Cinesphere. He's an Ontario. He was an Ontario-based architect. The Ontario Place launched his global career. Michael Huff was the landscape architect who designed the beautiful landscape and the forest that's now been cut down at Ontario Place. Ontario Place was designed to celebrate the ingenuity of Ontario. This government has contracted it out and given it away, plus a subsidy, tax subsidy, to an Austrian spa company and to an American concert venue. And so it has nothing to do with Ontario. And the reason I'm bringing this up is we need to support our local businesses. We need to celebrate Ontario businesses, Ontario entrepreneurs, Ontario ingenuity, and we can do it through this bill on cybersecurity and artificial intelligence by supporting our colleges, our public universities, our public hospitals, our public school boards, so that they can continue to make us global leaders in research and development and make our companies, help our companies to seize the opportunities of artificial intelligence and also to protect us from cybersecurity threats. So I'm hoping the government, and I've seen that some of you are listening, I hope you will take some of these recommendations seriously. The most important one is that we need to rebuild a robust public sector in order to seize the opportunities of artificial intelligence and to protect us from cybersecurity threats. And those include all of the things, all of the agencies that I've talked about, plus many, many more. So I look forward. Thank you for listening. I'm down to 10 seconds. I'm going to have a glass of water, and I think we open it up for questions. Thank you.
It is now time for questions and answers. I recognize the member for Brantford Brant.
Thank you, Speaker. Good to see you in the chair. And I appreciated listening to the member's speech. I think I caught most of it. I had to step out a couple of times because there's some other things going on this morning, but I really appreciated his in-depth look at this. And what, if I caught the gist right, and he can correct me, is that he's generally supportive and quite supportive of moving down the road of trying to control some of these emerging technologies in the province of Ontario. And I thought he had some very interesting and intriguing suggestions on what we could do with this legislation in order to improve it. So I guess my question to him is, will he and will his caucus be supporting this piece of legislation on second reading so that it can go to committee and he could put forward some of his amendments? And will he stand up in this House right now and say, yes, we are supporting this legislation so we can get that in there, and then we can further the conversation about improvements to the bill? Thank you, Speaker.
I recognize the member for Spadina, Fort York.
The risk with this bill is that the bill doesn't actually contain much. It's sort of a framework that allows the government, gives the power to the government to create regulations. The government needs to change that framework. We need to develop a definition of AI, about what are appropriate uses of artificial intelligence, what are inappropriate uses. We need to embed that into the legislation. We need to make sure that the small public sector agencies are given the supports that they need for the artificial intelligence revolution, but also to protect their data and cybersecurity. So if the government's open to making major amendments and making this bill transparent so that not everything is going to be done behind closed doors with regulation, it'll actually be part of the legislation, then I think we can support it. But we need to make sure that the government's willing to have a public debate and live by its own principles of responsible artificial intelligence adoption, which includes transparency. So we need this bill to be much more transparent.
Further questions? I recognize the member for Thunder Bay Superior North.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member from Spadina, Fort York, for really a wonderful presentation and introduction to the issues. So I am concerned about the regulations, so much work being done in regulations. We're at the very beginning of this. Nobody really knows how to solve all the problems that you have raised. So we need as many experts at the table as possible to sort out how this is going to play out, how we're going to support innovation here and support people's work and support our security. So I just wonder if you could speak to the importance of having those voices at the table.
Member for response.
Okay, thank you. And I want to thank the member from Thunder Bay Superior North for the incredible work that she does in supporting her community, which includes Geraldton, which is a place that I lived in at one time and is still near and dear to me. You're right. Artificial intelligence is moving at an exponential rate, and cybersecurity threats are also moving at an exponential rate. And there's no one person or no one group that has the expertise to help us to manage this. And this is really the opportunity for this government to reach across the floor and to develop a collaborative process, not just with us as legislators, but with public sector and private sector experts in a transparent way to develop the tools that we need to seize the opportunities of artificial intelligence, to protect us from its risks, and also to protect us and our province from increasing cybersecurity risks. So absolutely, collaboration has got to be key in the development of these policies.
I recognize the member from Markham Thornhill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to my colleague from Spadina, Fort York, for the in-depth presentation. I was enjoying your presentation. I know you are a lecturer. You are lecturing for us more than an hour, and a wonderful presentation. And I have a lot of respect for him. But having said that, Madam Speaker, and I was listening to him, very informative. But end of the day, he's not supporting this bill. You know, our government is committed to helping vital institutions such as school. A lot of students are here, hospital and child and family services center to protect the sensitive data in their care. Every Ontarian has a right to feel safe and protected through the cybersecurity attack. So my question to my colleague, I asked the member opposite to please tell us why they oppose measures that make Ontarians feel safe and protected when it's come to their data. Thank you so much.
The member for Spadina, Fort York.
And I want to thank the member from Markham Thornhill for your comments. We actually have a common friend from Delft, a small island just off Sri Lanka. Anyways, what we are asking for with this legislation is that there's 4 principles of good policy in artificial intelligence cybersecurity: responsible, transparent, accountable, and secure. And this government has to show us in this legislation that they are adopting all 4 of those principles that they say in the legislation, but that the legislation itself contradicts, because all of the legislation here is about giving the minister power to create regulations behind the scenes, the very opposite of the principle of transparency. So the government needs to show that it is willing to be transparent in the development of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity policy, so that we are, the public and the opposition can be confident that it is being developed in the public's best interest.
Questions. I recognize the member for London West.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I want to congratulate my colleague on his very thoughtful speech about this bill. He raised concerns about the risks involved if onerous requirements, costly requirements, are placed on public sector institutions that are already facing significant financial pressures. I know in my community, the CAS of London Middlesex is looking at a $9.1 million deficit. The hospital, LHSC, is projecting a $150 million deficit. Within the post-secondary sector, which this bill applies to, they're looking at he pointed out the number of universities that are reporting deficits this year. Can the member elaborate a bit more about why resources have to be allocated for public sector institutions to be successful in this framework?
To the member for Spadina, Fort York.
Okay. So I want to thank the member from London West for the question. If we've got $1.5 billion to give to Therma for the Ontario Place project, then we have enough money to fund our hospitals, our colleges, our universities. And instead, many of them, are on the verge of bankruptcy. The government gave $900 million in emergency funding to our colleges to keep them from going bankrupt this year. But that's not long-term supportive financing. That's just an emergency measure. 11 of our 23 universities in this province are running deficits. Our hospitals are cutting staff and services because they do not have enough money. And the risk is that all of these agencies are at greater risk of cybersecurity attacks because the hackers know that they are underfunded and that they don't have the money to hire the technology to protect them.
As the member for Peterborough Kawartha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the member opposite, he brought up some really interesting points here. And coming from the IT industry before getting into politics, I want to point out a couple of things. Our legislative process, if we do things relatively quickly, we introduce the bill at first reading, then it comes back for second reading. We've got 8 hours of debate, and then it'll go to committee for a couple of days, come back from committee after a couple of days, another 6.5 hours of debate to change something on the legislative side. On the regulatory side, though, we could make a change relatively quickly. So now let's say that we're in a hypothetical scenario where we've had a cyber attack and it has compromised our system, and we need to make a regulatory change to adjust for that. Is it prudent to take a minimum of a week to do that and be exposed for that length of time, or is it more prudent then to do it in a regulatory regime so that you can make that adjustment quickly?
Final response. I recognize the member for Spadina, Fort York.
Okay, and I want to thank the member from Peterborough for the Peterborough Kawartha. Thank you. Okay, Peterborough Kawartha for the question. The example that you give is a place where regulation would actually make sense. If there's a cyber attack, you may need to develop a regulation. But in the legislation, there should be a definition of artificial intelligence. What is an appropriate use of artificial intelligence? What is an inappropriate use of artificial intelligence? The European Union has developed legislation that has a framework like that. We also need support built into the legislation for these agencies to have adequate funding, not just for their day-to-day activities, but also for the emerging technology of artificial intelligence and for cybersecurity. So what we need in the legislation is a robust definition of artificial intelligence and commitment to support small, particularly small agencies, but public sector agencies in this tumultuous time.
That's all the time we have for questions and answers. We're going